A very good morning to everyone who's just joined us in the room. If you weren't here for the previous talk, you missed a very inspiring presentation by Enzo about QRP operating. But we're about to go now into an equally inspiring, anyway, talk by John, who's Victor Echo 3 India Papa Sierra. John, just remind us where you are in the world.
I'm located in Maple, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto.
There we go. So the international flavor of the QRP club continues. We may be a G club, but we've got members all over the world. And John very kindly offered to do this talk after some chat on the QRP club reflector about the PAC12 antenna and the various variations of it that have appeared on the market. And John said, well, I've made them, used them. So I asked him if he'd be willing to do a talk for us. And here he is. So without further ado, over to you, John, and we'll let you crack on with your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everybody. I wish I was there in person. Maybe that could happen in maybe the upcoming years. So we'll just use the technology of Zoom for it. And a great follow-up to what Enzo was talking about engaging activity and participating in different events and activities. They're always a lot of fun. Here we're going to have some antennas that we can use for it. And as many people know in Sprat, typically every issue there's something to do with antennas. And I've been in the hobby for the mid 70s. You know, band conditions were a lot better in those days. And being a teenager, I didn't have money to go out and buy an antenna. In fact, my first radio was an FRG 7 Yaesu receiver with a homebrew QRP transmitter, and then I also had the little MFJ 5-watt transmitter with two crystals, 7040 and 7115, which was in the novice band, and I had a long wire antenna, which I didn't even have a tuner, so I was still learning in those days, but I didn't seem to blow anything up. And I've always had an interest in antennas, so like guys kind of think, hey, you know, what's this guy coming to a Hamfest rally with an antenna made out of crutches? Well, it was the conversation of the day was all about talking about different antennas and loading them up, and I was able to make some contacts and stuff like that. So people kind of got a little bit of excited over it. So glad to be here. Just going to share some of the ideas. It's not going to be a step-by-step build out. There's a lot of information on that. I just give some ideas from my point of view, the antennas I made, and I've got a whisper test I did as well too, and kind of go through what we could have some fun. I've done other presentations to get more activity for clubbic stuff. Not that you guys need to do that when it comes to building, but it was about building, you know, an antenna in an afternoon. I see guys spending here in Canada like $300 for an alpha delta dipole. Yeah, it's great build quality for the wire and the insulators and the center inductor on it. It's pretty awesome, but you can make it a 10 out of speaker wire and some PVC plumbing as we'll kind of see. Okay, so for the agenda, I'm going to cover the PAC12 antenna. There's a commercial version, some homebrew buddy pole stuff and buddy stick stuff, kind of all follows into kind of the same flavor. We've got some participation from Australia with the Aussie pole, the W6 IPA vertical, QRP guys has one, and reference back to G3 YCC. I'm thankful that some of his content is still up. Stuff I picked up in Sprat a long time ago when I was a member in the early days, and then kind of moved out of the club and came back in as more and more excitement came around, doing more portable operations and building little things to do that. So here's a couple of versions of some of the antennas the other guys made, but let's get to it. So hey, while we were doing this page isn't up in the download site, but I asked Chat GTP3, right, starting to replace the ham radio operators, and tell me more about this PAC12 portable antenna. Well, it got it pretty close, right? It was its portability, multi-band capability, ease of assembly, tuning flexibility, compact size, correct? No ground radials required. So there you go. The AI is not always going to be proper. It does require a ground radial. So when I saw that, I said, hey, maybe we'll put that up. And then affordability, right? Cost-effective way to do that. So a little bit about the background. It was designed by James Bennett, KA5DVS. It primarily was for him as a travel antenna. So that was his whole reasoning behind it. It was originally published in issue number 8, QRP Homebrewer magazine. I do have a bunch of those magazines, and I was trying to dig through my shelf if I actually had that article itself, or did I have it in one of the other publications? Because it was also published in the G-QRP website. But if you Google PAC12 antenna, you'll find it very easily. 40 meter to 10 meter coverage. You can cover 6 meters with it as well. It is a classic center-loaded vertical that is 8 feet long, 244 centimeters. And typically it's called a compromise antenna. And the reason I use that term and other guys use that term is because it's shorter than a quarter wave antenna. So the ideal antenna we want to use, let's use, 20 meters, for example, roughly 16 feet, 5-6 inches, depending where you load it, roughly 5 meters and something. And that is a quarter wave antenna. So if we consider that to be the reference antenna, if anything that's shorter than that, half its size, which typically seems these 8-foot long antennas, and there's also these 4-foot long antenna. These are compromised antennas. So great for portability, opportunities where you can't get a full wire up, especially even on 40 meters. And so that's why we call them compromised antennas. Now, critical component in this is the 72-inch telescopic width, which was originally sold from Radio Shack. Radio Shack is no more. But you may be able to find some of these antennas at the flea markets, Hamfest, or rallies. It's been modified by various builders. Everybody's tried to make it your own. And there is a commercial version for the credit card operators. And it's easy to build, and it's a great performer. So what was James's design criteria? Well, it's a travel antenna. He wanted to be able to use commercial off-the-shelf components, stuff that's easy to find and buy. Lightweight, can be. Small packing size, so he designed all the elements to be packable down to 12 inches. So it'll fit in a backpack or even a carry-on bag. And the name comes from the portable antenna concept. So there's some football reference in Canada with the PAC10, I think it's called. But the PAC12 is, I think it could be a 12-bander antenna from 80 meters to 2 meters, including the UK 7-meter band. Also, I think there's a 7-meter band, but his design was he used the 12 as 12 inches, so it's packable down to that size. It's a QRP antenna as well, too. You're not going to be able to get 100 watts of power through it, but we're all 5 watt and below, or maybe 10 watt and below operators with some of the radios, so all good for us. Okay, so the bill of materials. So, some of the stuff I just got directly off the NJQRP website. Really, it's just using aluminum rods. The original design started off with using 1/4-inch rod. And of course, the reason for the 1/4-inch rod is to make it lightweight. There's also some PVC risers that are required. These are from the Rainbird Sprinkler Company. I'm not sure what's going to be able to be found in the UK marketplace or others from international countries that are in the convention today. But there's other different ways of doing it using the PVC tubing. And then obviously some bolts, coupler nuts, machine screws, that kind of stuff. The telescope antenna component. And then basically all the wiring is used as just basic 22 HWG wire. I prefer to use the plastic coated wire, and I know some guys are using enamel wire as well. I probably have more plastic coated wire than I do with enamel. Probably solid wire would be suitable as well for this as well too. And then probably because we're going to be doing some threading and stuff like that, you definitely need to use a tap and die. My first build, I used the 3/8-inch rod only because it was easy to find at the hardware store, and I can use it with standard CB antenna mount. So kind of the standard is this 3/8 by 24 fine threading, which is pretty standard. I think you guys have it in the UK as well too. So that might be the way of doing it that way. So I kind of started off with the heavy version because it wasn't really as much for me travel and it kind of became my proof of concept. Every time I kind of make something, I'll kind of make it as stupidly or quickly or roughly as required in order to me to ascertain is it worth now spending more time and effort to go ahead and do a better job at it. Or while you're thinking it out, you'll come back with a couple ideas to do things a different way. These things will evolve over time, especially when you see what other guys are doing. There's also a great antenna that I've been using for some club meetings and stuff like that with different clubs is kind of a show and tell. So again, it sparks up the conversation. And actually, now that I have a slide deck for this, I can present this to some other customers, and I'll make other clubs, and I'll make some modifications to it accordingly. Okay, so 5 primary components: telescopic whip. We need band coils. These Rainbird sprinkler PVC risers. The main thing about those is they have this 1/2-inch thread on it, so you can put caps on it. All stuff you'll find in the plumbing aisle of your hardware store. We need 2 lower antenna rods, and then a BNC mount or an SO239, and as well the ground spike rod, which is probably the easiest thing for us to make in this project. Excuse me. So the telescopic whip. Well, it's from Radio Shack. It's unobtained them, and it's got to be 6 feet long, and it did have the ability to put a 1/4 inch by 20 thread on it, which is what that antenna is using in the original design. So what are our options? Well, we can get the Buddy Pull featherweight whip. That antenna, that's 72 inches, 1/4 by 20. Chris and Bud at Buddy Pull in the UK, in the US, have it. I know it's Royal Mail's gotten pretty expensive to ship a 40-pound antenna from Sandpiper to Canada is almost 50 pounds. It costs more to ship it than it does for the actual product. But the GQRP Club, maybe there's a group buy potential for that. These things only cost about, with the knurled collar, I think they're still around $10 for both items. So a group buy could be done something like that, or maybe Dayton. You go down to Dayton and order them in advance and tuck them in your suitcase and bring them home for the guys at the next club meeting or meetup. So that would probably be the whip that I would recommend off the bat to get that one. Now, I don't know if Moonraker or Sandpiper have anything like that. They always seem a little bit more innovative than some of the other guys in putting some things together. So there may be some telescopic whips available from those. There's the Chinese whip. Be careful with those. The threading, at least for me, I'm using either 1/4 inch or 3/8. They do have metric threads antenna. So a recent antenna I got was the MC750 from JNC Radio. It's got a nice telescopic whip. It's got an antenna base, radials. It's even got its own ground spike. But it's all metric threading, so I can't mix and match with other stuff, but that might work out okay for you guys in the UK or international. Rally, Hamfest specials, I always have an eye out for those to try to grab those things before other people grab them, because I know I'll always use them from antenna projects. There's also the MFJ 10-foot whip. That would be the most expensive option. I think it's going to be around, I think there's $60-70 here in Toronto. They do have a 3/8 inch stud on it, but it's just a little bit too expensive, I think, in order to homebrew something up where you may want to do it a different way. Now, one thing that I've tried is using PVC tubing and just running a wire along the side and taping the wire to it, and then putting the telescopic antenna on that. So really, you don't really need to go from 3 feet to 6 feet. You're probably going to use the tuning end is going to be very minimal at the ends of the antenna. So even if you had a 3-foot whip, you could make a base, add an additional rod at a 3-foot rod, and then connect it to that. So the only thing that's telescoping is the last 3 feet of the antenna. That would be acceptable as well too. That'll kind of come about as you kind of see how this is coming together. So the coils, again, we're using this PVC riser, just drilling a couple of holes, running some wires through it, bolting on the caps, putting the connection points onto those so we can connect them all together. It's all designed using the 2-foot base and the 6-foot radiating element. So if you decide to make some modifications, you can use the online calculators or pull out the antenna handbook and go through that in order to come up with the calculations for the number of turns required for that coil. 22 gauge plastic coated hookup wire is fine. That's what he used. In these calculators, there's always this wire thickness and it has insulation or not. Seems to make a little difference, but I don't see it that it makes a huge difference. Doesn't really matter. 21 turns, you're going to adjust the amount of turns anyways. Choose your bands. I started with 20 meters first, only because it would probably be the simplest one to build. And I can jump on 20 to see how effective it is. And you got to use 1/4 by 20 hardware throughout. That's what I ended up using. And also the one for 3/8. So here you can see on 14010, the coil length's about 1.5 inches. The PVC risers are 3-inch, and there's some hole spacing, and it's 23 turns of wire. Obviously, when you get up to 10 meters, you're only going to require 1 turn. The antenna is almost radiant on that band. And the lower bands, 86 turns for 40 meters. I don't personally see this as effective 80-meter and 40-meter antennas. I think they have the ability of having some success for regional contacts. I don't expect you to make a lot of DX contacts, but when you're running low power, every watt helps. So you probably want to use a more efficient antenna on the low bands, but for the bands 20 meters and up, they work very, very well. Okay, here's a view of some of the coils I put together. This one here, I saw the owner's manual for QRP antennas, and they were using some of these metal caps on it. So I thought maybe for sturdiness, I'll make one of those to see how that works out. It's really still PVC tubing, and then these caps put on it. So that's a way to avoid not having to use these sprinkler coils. Here's another one I made here. So this one I wrapped it up in PVC shrink tubing, and that kind of detuned the coil a little bit. So I have to pull that off and make some slight adjustments to get it to match without a tuner. Obviously, if you add a tuner, I wouldn't have to worry about it. Here's one of the bases thing. We'll talk about that later. And then here's the selection of the coils that I made. And again, these are heavier, 3/8-inch stud. Came up with the idea of here, why don't I combine 2 coils together and be able to tap the 2 together? So there's a way of doing that too. And in this case, I didn't use the riser tubing. I just ended up using PVC tubing. And that worked out as well too. So again, use locally what you have available for you. So the next component is the lower rod. Again, you're gonna have to thread this out, tap and die set. You do need to take your time. You want to make the threads level, but it's fairly easy to do. I was surprised. I had never done this ever before. So I was a little bit hesitant about it, but after a couple of tries with some short pieces in my vise in order just to get the feel of how to put all this together, I started then working on the actual rod element itself. We used coupler nuts to join the antenna. So those are pretty easy to get. Now, for those that decide, hey, maybe I don't want to do that, or I want to plug and play or make some modifications and start playing around on my own and swerve away from the actual build out from the way he did it, you can use the Hustler MO4 rod. I have a bunch of those rods. Those are 22 inches. Yeah, it's going to affect the number of turns slightly. So you might need to add a turn or take a turn off in order to get the SWR where you want it to, but it's something you can just procure right away. Buddy pole antenna arms as well too. Those are 22 inches long as well. I have buddy pole antennas, so I've tried using that as well too with the PAC12 coil instead of a buddy pole coil. That works as well too. And then we have the, like I said, the turn counts is based on upper lower antenna dimensions. The 2 rods are needed for a length of 24. So in this case here, you could have 1 rod and not worry about portability, or you can end up using 2 rods. And there's no reason this lower rod element, you couldn't even want it, if you wanted to, you could make the whole antenna out of PVC tubing. Then we have the BNC mount. So we have to connect the lower rod to something and then feed that to our antenna as well with the ground plane. So there are, again, they're using the riser element here, a little bit of aluminum flat bar, a little bit of drilling of some holes and stuff like that with a simple hand drill, and you're able to make a mount for it. Here's another version. I couldn't find this guy's call sign, but JC Haywire, he made his one. This one a different way as well too. Kind of same in design, but he used an L bracket. So again, use what you have and go from there. The other ones here that I have, so I made one out of PVC tubing here using a T adapter. The red jack is for the actual ground wire. I did not ground the bottom element. I decided to use a separate ground wire for that. So it gives me different mounting options onto the base, which you'll see in the next slide. The other thing here is the Workman QRC S3 Jaws clamp. It's a CB radial clamp. I bought, usually I pick them up at Dayton, some CB shops on the way down. We'll find those. Chameleon Antenna makes one, sells one as well too, which is seems identical to this one. And you can get them on Amazon as well too. They're not expensive. I think I have 4 or 5 of these, 5 or 6 of these. And they're very, very easy to clamp onto different items, pipes, picnic tables, barbecues, bicycles, anything you can get a grip on this, you can make an antenna mount. And then put the appropriate stud on it that you want to use for the antenna you made. Okay, now the ground spike. This is probably the easiest thing to make because really all it is, it's a 12-inch rod, and we put a coupler nut on it, and we can connect that to the BNC mount, and you can place that antenna into the grass, and just be careful with the bench grinder. But I did make various versions. So I have a heavy 3/8 version. I have another one here. I put some, in this case here, I just used some pipe strap to put some radials to it, a piece of rope or paracord so I can pull that back out. And then at the bottom one, I got a lighter weight version there with a coupler nut on it. And I've cut that with a hacksaw, and then I ground it down on the grinder. And I've got a little protector on the tip there. It is a little bit sharp. That way I can get in and out of the ground pretty easily. So that's very, very simple to make. Now, I have the UK Copycat Edition. I don't know where I saw that. I think I saw it in the Practical Wireless a couple of issues ago. I don't know if it was a UK product. I think somebody in the UK made it. So I just found a Hammond metal box here, put a connector on it, drilled some holes through it, and then figured, hey, I'll just put some bolts in it so I can now tie this box to this ground brick. I did leave. I probably needed a longer gap here, so I can use a hammer to hammer this in. This 3/8 inch ground rod is pretty heavy and harder to work with. So I'm going to look at making a lightweight 1/8 version. So if you don't want to build a PAC12 antenna, but you want to build a ground rod, here's a couple of perfect ideas in order to go ahead and do that. Okay, now the counterpoise. So number 22, you want to use stranded wire. You want flexible wire, add a spade terminal to it. You can make your own line wires, 3D printed or cut from plastic cutter boards. Soda Beans makes them as well too, so you can get them locally for low shipping costs. The SWR is really kind of adjusted by shortening or lengthening the counterpoise wire. As long as the coil is, the resonance of the antenna is within range of 20 meters, you'll find as you make adjustments to that counterpoise wire, it's going to adjust the SWR. You also want to use that counterpoise elevated 2-3 feet off the ground to avoid ground losses. You'll find that you'll have a more stable SWR and ability to get a better SWR because we don't have to worry about anything lying on the ground. And then also you want to point this counterpoise in the direction of the intended target station. It does make a little bit of a difference. I wouldn't say it's you'll notice it in an impactful way. But there is some maybe a couple of dB of kind of directivity going towards that direction. So at low power, QRP levels on the transmit side is going to be definitely useful. 4 radials work better than 1. I found that out. So I tried 8, 16, 32, and I didn't really think I was getting much improvement on any type of antenna. So in this case here, I wouldn't show up at a park or pack in my travel bag, 32 radials. I'd probably, in this case here, I'd probably use 1 or 2 radials and I'd be done and happy with the performance. The using ribbon cable also allows more wire in the ground. So if you can find, the ribbon cable, I would grab it and then you can use 5, 6, 8 strands, short them all out, tie them to the thing. You can tune the radials and cut them accordingly as well too if you wanted to, or you could just leave them all kind of the same length, and then you can kind of roll it in and out. The ribbon cable is harder to roll in and out in order to adjust resonance. But you'd be close enough that you can hit the tune button on your radio and off you go, and not worry about fiddling around with the antenna. For the purist, we're probably going to want to, move back and forth and try to nail that SWR down to as low as possible to make sure we got maximum signal output. And from my antenna bag, I've got different line wires. So this is just closed line wire. I took the string out and put the stranded wire in there. I've got this line reel. This is from the Milwaukee brand. It's a chalk reel. I think I have 100 feet of number 26 Teflon wire that I picked up at a Hamfest, put a ring on it, and I can roll that in and out nice and neat. And I also have some rubber coated wire that's pretty flexible. I have 34 feet of that, so I'll use that as well. And a friend of mine 3D printed a nice line wire for me. So that's a good way to go. It is heavier, right? So for us soda gram counter guys, we're probably going to use thinner wire. Leave that at home. Okay, so we have now a complete PAC12 antenna. The one on the left is the 82A version that he made up. So again, very representative of exactly what you see in the article. And then on the right side, this is my version. So this is kind of my final version that I use. This was planned for a trip to Azores, which was canceled a week before they shut everything down due to the pandemic. So we may have been stuck on the island there, but probably not a bad island to be stuck on. So I decided to make a lightweight version, and probably was going to focus on just bringing, a couple antennas. And I think I was probably going to be looking at a 20-meter dipole. And this vertical, I thought I might bring a second coil as well too, maybe for 17 meters. But this is the one I end up making. Now, the threaded rod, not threaded rod, the stainless steel rods I just found those at a hardware store. They had the right threading, and they're about 12 inches long. So it turned out to be perfect. I didn't have to do anything. And you've got, real machine-made threads, and it's actually very nice and pretty solid. That actually worked out pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that as the final version. And I kind of prefer this end cap coil that had the copper on it, even though there's PVC tubing behind it. Okay, so here's another version of this. So this one is the 3/8-inch version. Now, here's my jaws clamp. I've got a lower rod. This lower rod is a bit short. So I just did, I have a different coil for it. This was just kind of the prototype one. I just wanted to show you one that I made here. I got my 20-meter coil. This one here, this is a golf retriever, and it's about 10 feet long. And I was able to put a 3/8-inch nut in there and drill a couple of holes and put a little set screw in there and put some shrink wrap around it. And that worked out pretty good. So that might be something you pick up at a thrift store as opposed to getting a new one, or maybe you don't play golf anymore. You realize you're going to have an antenna out of it. And this one here is just a top whip here. This was a broken telescopic whip that I had, and I found in my junk box this space and was able to jam it in there and set the screw on it, and it's got a thread on it. So There's another version of a PAC12 with stuff just lying around in the junk box. Again, they're very simple, right? I didn't design anything. All James did is took the idea of the center loaded 8-foot antenna, made some calculations, and then started figuring out, hey, if I want to pack this into a 12-inch space, I'm going to make everything 12 inches. So how do I make my coils? And wandering around in a hardware store, you'll get all kinds of ideas for antennas. Okay, so my friend's an analyst, and he's always asking for data. Yeah, great. Yeah, you worked some guy in Scotland. Okay, great. We hear those guys on all the time. Oh, G3s, yeah, there's a dime a dozen on 20 meters. Yeah, no problem. But what are the actual data components? Which one's better than the other one? So the other day I was doing some testing here on the MC750 antenna by JNC Radio, which is a quarter wave antenna, telescopic whip. On 40 meters, it has a coil. Great antenna. It's got the spike on it, comes in a carry bag. Very happy with that antenna. So I threw that on Whisper, 20 meters in the afternoon at the park using the 100 milliwatt setting, and was able to pick up roughly, let's call it, I think it was like 23 stations. So out of those 23 stations, I had West Coast station, West Coast, and a Scottish station. So I was picked up by a Whisper receiver in Scotland. So as you can see on the map here, I've got West Coast contacts, and I've got one in Scotland. So now I switched over to the PAC12 antenna on 20 meters. And now I think I only got about 13 stations. So I missed out on a whole bunch of stations. And I did not get these stations in red. So the stations in red were farther stations I picked up with a quarter wave antenna versus the compromise antenna. But look, on the compromise antennas, I'm making contacts up and down the East Coast, West Coast, mid US. Compromise antennas work. So do not get worried that, oh, I'm going to make an 8-foot antenna. It's not going to work. You will get out, you will make contacts. And if for those that are doing Whisper, which is turning into, was I think originally a digital QRP mode, I'm hearing more and more guys running 100 watts and 1500 watts on Whisper in order to work DX stations. But anyways, these compromise antennas will work for you. Okay, here's some modifications. There's a multi-band coil. This one's the QST $20 antenna. It's just, again, PVC tubing from the store and just using copper wire or different wire in order to make these coils, pretty standard. This is the Hustler VP1. It's an antenna mount. Actually, if you flip, you're actually supposed to flip this over. It goes to the center rod, which is 54 inches, and then you could put 3 tuning coils on the top of the antenna. So you basically have like a mobile tri-band antenna. What I did is I just flipped this over, and then because the holes are already cut out for 3 8-inch rod, I used some threaded rod and took some bits and pieces from the hardware store and made myself an antenna mount that I could put that antenna on. Now this base is a little bit short. I do have some longer rods to make it more wider, but I just chose this one. This is just a desktop mount. I had some extra rod lying around of some short pieces, so I thought I'd make a desktop mount as well too. I have another one here that I'm using with the standard SO239 connector as well too. And again, you probably drill a hole in the side, put a butterfly knot on it, and that's where you can hang off your counterpoise. The other one very easily is a camera tripod mount. This one here, we have the JAWS clamp on it. This is a heavier tripod mount. Actually, this is a speaker mount, speaker stand mount. But regular camera tripods definitely have that 1/4 inch by 20 stud. And you can now screw into that, and you can use a camera tripod in order to put your antenna up and then hang the radial off of that. So again, using components lying around the house. Now for the credit card operators, those that say, hey, I love the antenna idea, I want to make one, but I think it's easier if I just buy the kit and not spend time running around to buy all the different components. Maybe it'll solve my telescopic wick problem. GQRPkits.com. So this is James's company, and he's got a commercial version of that. Pull the manual down. There's also building instructions in there. And here's some examples of the one that he sells. So in this case here, he's using ribbon cable as ground radials, which puts a little bit more wire into the ground. Now they're out of stock, so probably reach out to James. But I checked with him for, he was selling these coil assemblies as separate components. So I thought, hey, I would buy those. But he was out of stock on those. So he may have been out of stock on this for a while. But again, very simple, easy antenna to build. Okay, let's look at the buddy pole. So the buddy pole kind of came out a couple of years earlier than the PAC12 antenna came out. And Bud W3FF designed this antenna out of PVC tubing, again, using that telescope 72-inch whip. So in this case here, he's got longer arms, so he made antenna arms out of using PVC, and he's got coils very, very similar to the turn counts that we have with the PAC12 antenna, except in this version, this is a dipole. You can make a PAC12 antenna dipole. I have double coils for all the bands, and I've been playing around with that. Or you could also make a buddy pole antenna as well, too, if you wanted to. Or this could be project number 2. And again, this will give you ideas. So here they're using 22 inches. The PAC12's got 24 inches, and using kind of the same concept of using the part. So here's my coils that I have here. I just wrapped some clear tape around it and used the spade lugs like he did. So this was my first generation, and then I made alternate versions as I tried to improve on it. Eventually, what Bud did is he created the commercial version of the buddy pole as we know it today. HBP refers to homebrew buddy pole, and you'll see guys talking about the CBP in the forums. They're referring to the commercial version of the buddy pole. But again, if you pull down the manual or the excellent buddy pole book, that is a free download PDF file, you'll have all kinds of information if you want to make this type of antenna. The buddy stick, right? So the buddy stick antenna, the homebrew buddy stick antenna, would be very similar to the PAC12. And in this case, everything's kind of all the same, except what he's doing here is he's got a 9.5-foot whip on the top. So if you only have a 36-inch antenna or a meter-long antenna, you need a couple of need more than 3 meters. You can use PVC tubing, and then on the top, affix the shorter whip antenna to that. The main thing is you just get the same radiating length, whichever way you want to do it, and then use your separate coils. So there's a way of doing it that too. The 9.5-foot whip you'll find in Canada and the US, the AT271. Some vendors are now selling that as optional components. Chameleon has it, and REZ Antenna, a new antenna player in the field that I met down at Dayton. I actually have his Ranger 80 antenna in a box that came to me the other day. I'm going to do some review and evaluation on that. Use a very similar antenna. So if you see those, you'll want to buy those. Sometimes they can be pretty cheap, and sometimes they can be pretty expensive. That is very similar to the Klansman whip antenna. So the whip antenna for the Klansman 320 HF radio is probably roughly around the same length. I can't remember the stud on it because I don't have a Klansman anymore. HF radio, I sold it, but I think the antenna on that may have been the same 3/8, 24 threading, something to check. So there's a version there that you can build or mix and match. Okay, so we've got our Aussie guys. Can't forget the other side of the world. They have something called the Aussie pole. Peter VK2 EVB, when these guys first started coming out with this, was really around using it as a club project, and it turns into a kit. I don't know why they ended up discontinue it, because I published posts of this on my blog, and I probably sent out 200-300 people the actual building instructions for it. For some whatever reason, they kind of disappeared. They've kind of been posted up on some of the forums. If you need one, let me know. Again, same concept, PVC tubing, done in a slightly different way. We've got different coils for it and using a telescopic whip on the end. So this will give you some ideas the way they did it if you want to make some modifications the way you want to build your portable antenna. Here's my version. And as you'll see, PVC plumbing pipe is the foundation of many antenna build outs. I've got an electrical box here I used with some with a spacer insert here, epoxied in, a mast mount, obviously putting the BNC on it. I chose to use banana jacks on it, so I can kind of use this for plug and play for other experimentation. You know, I could replace this PVC with a piece of metal, or like buddy pull. They use those aluminum arms for it, but in this case here, I just built it true to the actual design. I didn't do one for 40, so I just did. I think I got here 20, 17, 15, and 10. And in this case here, I'm using buddy pull whips for it. These are not the featherweight whips. They're the, I think they're 54 inches long. So I use those. So I designed everything to use those whips for it. And it works pretty good. It's basically, 8-foot dipole on either side. And it works as well too. So there's a variation there. You could turn this into a vertical and just build one side if you wanted to as well too. I'm a member of the California QRP group, and I used to go to meetings and stuff like that when I worked for a California company in San Francisco. This is the W6 IPA 20-meter vertical. The nice thing about this is you can go to my blog and see what the information is on. And I got a link on there for the Thingiverse that you can go ahead and 3D print this. So I have a 3D printed version. In this case here, I did use the featherweight whips from Buddy Pull and 1/4-inch threaded rod. So I kind of did it different than his. His is kind of an all-in-one component piece. I made my modular here so I can use this whip assembly. I can't remember where this whip assembly came from. I don't think it's the Buddy Pull whip, but whatever whip he used, he's got that mounted in, so it's you can't unscrew it or anything like that. QRP guys, this is an interesting antenna too. It's kind of a variation on the one that John made. The DS1s, you can go to the QRP guys website. They're actually the Richard KI6NS, I think his call is. He's kind of the founder of the club, and he's pretty active in the QRP community. So he's got a small little company there that they sell kits and parts and different antenna stuff. So this is the one he had, and this is where I got the idea for. They were using this copper endpoints just because it was convenient, put some wiring on it. And this is more of a base loaded type vertical. But as you can see through here, this design in the lower right-hand corner, it's just a piece of aluminum plate, a couple of holes in it, a BNC mount, and a butterfly nut there for the wire. So again, different ideas in order to make different antennas. Here's my version of it. Okay, yeah, it was the 52-inch whip. I made another version here just using PVC tubing, and I used magnet wire this time, just because I had some lying around. So I thought, hey, why don't we try making one with some magnet wire, see what happens. And here's reference to G3YCC. I probably can't tell you how many times I probably went to go look at this version. I did make a 20-meter version of it. I forgot to take a photo of it, but again, base loaded antenna. This one uses a 4-foot whip, so it's a lot shorter antenna. So the only reason I showed this one is when I talk about compromise antennas, sometimes I'll refer to me, the standard compromise antenna is going to be all these designs around the 8-foot antenna. And then the more of a super compromise antenna is down to a 4-foot antenna. So there are some, MFJ makes some base loaded whips, very, very similar to this design. And I made a bunch as well too. So I've been to Italy a couple of times. So I did do a soda activation in Kronenplatz, which is in northern Italy near Bolzano, Vienna border. 20 meters. I used this 4-foot whip, MFJ 1820T, I think it is. At my FT817, sitting on top of the soda site, looking down into 3 villages. and I was not able to get a SOTA activation. It wasn't a good propagation day. And because I'm top of the summit, not knowing exactly what to expect, I didn't bring all these other longer antennas. I think if I had a longer antenna, probably wouldn't have made a difference, but band conditions were pretty poor. And then last year, I was in Venice, and I was going to do a Parks on the Air activation from the canal. And I brought my FT 818 this time, and again, using these compromise antennas. And I was able to make a handful of contacts into France, a couple into the UK. I was not able to get 10 of the contacts in order to get the activation. So I would like to go back to Venice at one point to get that activation, and maybe go back to the UK as well too, make some activations in that. And I would probably be using the PAC12 antenna because it is a little bit longer and it'll be a little bit more efficient at QRP power. Okay, so in summary here, compromise antennas definitely do work. Modify them as needed based on local parts availability. Don't get caught up in following the bill of materials exactly. It's all about innovation, and this club has members that all they probably think about is an innovation and coming up with better ideas. I think we've had various versions of the oneer that different people have done and have made modifications. Enzo even talked about as one too, relating to radios. Now we have the ability of making these modifications and having fun with antennas. Could be a great fun club project to get hams outdoors for POTA and SOTA. I think this would be more as a group buy, right? So, we're all members of G-QRP, but within members of local clubs in your own city. So this could be maybe a group buy to get some of the materials, probably specifically some of the buddy pole whips to get those on try to save some money on shipping. We're going to get lots of room for innovation and mod. One approach that I seem to take is a modular approach. To me, is the best solution. So I like having the ability of changing the coils. I like having the ability of using different lower rods or upper rods and experimenting with different things or trying to do different things, taking bits and pieces from one brand and using it with another brand, just to make things better or kind of work in the way that I want to see it work. So that might be a good recommendation for you guys to kind of do that approach. But then you can use these bits and pieces for other antennas that you play around with. There'll probably be some other stuff that'll come about in the various issues on different ideas to make these antennas. And one is none, and two is one. So the reason I put that is Vince V6LK mentioned it in a podcast, and it resonated with me because I do a lot of parks on the air. In SOTA, I probably only have a couple of locations here that are not even really true alpine mountains, but they're enough to qualify. They're at least an hour away, but I got a park at the end of my street, park 5 minutes up the street, and 10, 15 minutes away, I've got 2-3 other parks I can go activate. It's always like, bring out 2 connectors, bring out 2 sets of cables, bring out 2 of this, 2 of that. Do not put them all in the same bag. Have them in separate bags, one in the trunk, one you bring, because if you forget one, so I leave in my trunk a whole little bag full of connectors, cables, and coax just in case I go and forget it. I would say the same thing with antennas. So I always bring out 2 antennas out to whatever activation I go. If I can hang up a dipole, I'll hook up a dipole. If I can't, then I'll go ahead and use one of these, go stick one of these vertical antennas into the ground and go make some contact. Okay, so with that, we'll do some Q&A here, either through audio or through chat, I think. Maybe Anthony's managing that. You guys can reach me at jleonardelli@awrl.net or v3ips@gmail.com. I do have a blog. You'll see a bunch of antenna stuff, and some of the pictures I have on here might show up on there as well. v3ips.wordpress.com. And I've got an Instagram account, v3ips_portable_operator. So you may see some POTA activations or pics of here and there. You may even see pictures of pizza slices. So
thank you very much, John, and hopefully we can just quickly show appreciation. That's great. And I can't see any chat in the chat box. So is there any questions in the room We've got one there. If you can just wait, bring the microphone, and then the people online can hear your question.
You always use 2 rods below the coil, between the coil and the feed point.
Yes.
Surely that's the part that does the most radiation. So wouldn't it be advantageous to extend that part?
So if I heard you correctly, so the lower antenna has 2 rods. It does. The only reason he made 2 rods is he wanted to take 24 inches and pack it into 12 inches, so it'll fit in a side pocket. You know, specifically the ICOM 705 backpacks. Probably, you know, you could put a 12-inch antenna in there, or a regular backpack. But there's no reason why you couldn't use a 24-inch rod. And that's where I showed the Hustler MO4 base, or even the Buddy Pull bases. You can use those. It's just a matter of, you know, portability in that. Or you can say, hey, John, I don't have the rod. I can just go ahead and get myself a piece of PVC tubing, or even a wooden dowel that's 24 inches long, and just running a wire along that and putting some tape around it just to create that radiating element. The problem is, how do I connect that to the coil, and how did I connect that to the whip, which you know, I think I kind of talked about enough ideas that'll kind of give you a way around doing that. I've tried it with wooden dowels just to try to make, I think G3YCC's got that little 2-element 20-meter compromise Yagi. I was going to try to do something with wooden dowels with that, and I realized trying to get the hole properly and gluing this and gluing that is easier to do it with like PVC. Does that answer your question?
No, just one moment.
Yep.
We have a question from John online. Go ahead, John, unmute.
Yeah, I have a brilliant talk. I've been messing with the PAC12, and in the UK, shipped from Pacific Antennas. That antenna costs more than the actual in postage of the antenna. So what I did, I went to B&Q and got some hollow aluminium tubing, and put a split in the top half of the lower whip, part of the sliding mechanism, and put a Jubilee clip around, and that sufficed for the telescopic. It was an easier option for us lot in the UK than shipping across from the States, thanks to Mr. Trump.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is because of the retaliation for the heavy cost of the Royal Mail cost to ship things from Soda Beams to Canada,
Yeah.
or even from Sandpiper. I was going to buy something from Sandpiper, and it was like, I want to have this antenna. It turned out later, I actually found the exact antenna I wanted was one of those HO type loops there. I was able to find it at a Hamfest, and I go, where'd you get this from? He goes, oh, I ordered it from the UK. Right. And I said, well, I'm definitely not paying you shipping for it. But you brought up a great idea, John, that I didn't even consider here at all. And I've had different ways where I've thought I would make different components for my antenna using the aluminum tubing. The problem I have is I'm not a British tool and die guy with a lot of, you know, airplane making experience. So for me, I would drill holes, and you know, I'm not good at tapping and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can make this antenna definitely out of using aluminum tubing, and just figuring out whichever way you want in order to provide the connections to the coil in that. I think you'll see a couple of designs with that. Now I know there's a guy who wrote the PAC12 antenna using metric. I didn't want to read his article, so in a way it wouldn't kind of influence me, and you know, in whatever I wanted to talk about here. But I should have put an example of that. But the aluminum tubing approach is excellent. And if you could slide that aluminum tubing in and out to make that telescopic whip, you'd be laughing as well too. Because I really think at the end of the whip, I should probably measure it out. You probably don't need to telescope more than you know, a few inches in order to get the antenna. But the way you want to really design the antenna and make the adjustment on is, I found if I extend the antenna, I think completely using the coil turns I have with the way I have my radial set up, the SWR is under 2-to-1. And if I'm using an Elecraft, then you hit the tune button, I don't worry about it. If I'm using, a 705 or an 817, there's no antenna tuner. So then I'll get up off the chair and, go make adjustments to try to get the SWR down. But you may find you may not have to make much changes to the telescopic whip as well. But if you can move it around a couple inches in that, it may bring the SWR a little bit closer to where you need it to be. But yeah, that's a great idea. I'll make a note of that and add it to my slide for the next time.
The tip, John, is when you cut the slit in the top, I don't have a hell of a lot of tooling, but I've got a lot of engineering experience, and use a junior hacksaw blade. You probably call them mini hacksaws over there.
Yeah.
And you cut the split in the top at 90 degrees, obviously line it all up and cut that down. So it's a thinner cut. And there's micro hose clips, you call them, Jubilee clips.
Yep.
They just crimp it up. And yeah, 5 inches is what I found to slide up and down. So
Okay.
it's brilliant.
Yeah, if you look at the Buddy Pull website now, they're out of stock. I was talking to Chris at Dayton Hambenchen, and he said he can't find any guys to make these. So he made a telescopic whip with shock cord coil. Kind of looks like those, those most guys tell me it looks like those 10 poles that are shock corded, but it's made out of aluminum. But what he did at the end of it, he's got a slider that goes in and out by about, I think, 12 inches. So now you could adjust the total length of that kind of shock corded, kind of a modification between the two. And it sounds like, from what you're doing with that slider on the end, and in a way, there's an idea there too that maybe you could, take some thicker shock corded coils and maybe even make something out of that. But I think the innovation component here is, hey, aluminum tubing could be your friend too.
Thank you.
Thank you to both Johns there. I'm conscious of the time. Just picking up on something that John said though about the metric version. In the next sprat, which is at the printers, I've got a hot off the Graham printer copy, is an article called "A More Metric PAC12 Antenna" by Graham G7 GRW. So there's some further information coming in the next sprat. So that'll be something to hopefully add a little bit to the mix. So unless there's any more questions in the room, I don't see any hands going up. I don't see any chat. Once again, just to say thank you to John all the way over there in Canada for sharing his experience with us. That's been a fantastic presentation, and thank you very much.